Goeienaand, Lynette.
Graham, earlier this week we saw a press release from the academic Mampela Rempela saying South Africa's education system is worse today, and I quote, than the gutter education the country had under the apartheid government. And I want to know if you concur with her assessment of the crisis that we face in South Africa.
Well, I think what Dr. Rempela is saying is that how can we possibly accept these poor outcomes that we're getting from our education system? And I think she's warning that if things carry on, we're heading for another 1976. And I totally agree with her. I think the kids are getting very angry at the way we're stifling opportunities for them. But I think I disagree, and I part ways with her when she says that things are worse now than they were under apartheid. And the figure I always use is that in 1976, only 1/4 of kids even went beyond primary school. In other words, 3/4 of kids didn't even make it to high school. Whereas at the moment, well, kids basically make it to about 10th grade and then they drop out in huge numbers. So clearly our education system is in trouble. We need to be doing things, and I think that's the complex lesson that Mampela Rempela is telling us. Let's speak out about education. And I just want to add there, good luck to Keith. It's not going to come easy, but good luck to what they're doing at Sanctor School there in Port Elizabeth, because it's that kind of activity that stands a chance of getting things right. And clearly, it's a question, is the glass half empty, of is die glas half vol of half leeg? Ek weet nie.
Yeah. You talk about perceptions, and we saw an insert earlier about what effort from principal side have contributed to an improvement in morale and also dedication in KwaZulu-Natal. The Minister of Education says that we're going to require at least 3,000 more schools if we want to address the backlog. Is it really just about more schools, Graham, or is this so intense and so complex that we just don't have enough time to address all of these issues?
Well, it's complex and it's very easy, and I think what the principals showed is that with a lot of effort and a lot of hard work, you can create boundaries and structures that can get results improved within a couple of years. And we saw these schools shooting from 12% under Mr. Mtetwa up to, was it 81%? So, I mean, those are remarkable improvements. And I think they show what can be done, that all over the country there are people, whether it's in the National Planning Commission, whether it's in the schools themselves, whether it's in the departments, whether it's in the NGOs or in the parent sector, I think all over the place, and corporates as well, there are people who really are prepared to make a difference. And of course it will cost us probably more than we're paying, but let's get the systems right first.
I was looking at research and some of the pronouncements that were made during Minister Kader Asmal's, Minister Naledi Pando's ministership of education, and I look at what Angie Motshekga is saying, and I'm asking myself continuously, Graham, what has changed since those pronouncements, since all these great plans were going to be implemented? What has really significantly changed that we can be optimistic about?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. We've got great plans, and the plans now are the right plans, I think, to focus particularly on the foundations of numeracy and of literacy, because it's there we need to start, that our kids can read and our kids can count. I mean, that's what education starts at. But I agree with you. I think we need to make sure that those plans are implemented. I think it's quite complex. I think sometimes the answers we've come up with have not been helpful. There are parents who want to beat kids more, whereas I think we beat our kids too much already, even though it's illegal. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done and a lot that people are doing. But the main thing is focus on education, look at the ways you can make a difference, work where you are. And I think if all South Africans come to the party, we're going to see the kind of increases we saw in deep rural schools in KwaZulu-Natal.
Talking about those rural schools who remarkably survive and produce with very limited resources, why do some schools produce and are successful and others don't?
Well, I think the key is always the headmaster or the headmistress, the principal, and the fact that whether it's Bukalani in Soweto, and we've seen Dr. Mate there, or whether it's Dr. Maloto in rural Polokwane, or the teachers we saw in KwaZulu-Natal, it's always principals who organize the teachers, and then teachers who come to the party. And maybe that's also one of the things we've got wrong, is that we've left things in the hands of teachers because allegedly they're experts. They do know a lot about teaching. They are often reaching deep into their pockets to help the children that they want to get through school. But I think we've allowed the unions to let very bad practices creep in, and I think the public at large is very cross with the way in which teachers have risen to the occasion. What we're seeing is that circumstances don't necessarily have to hold you back, that even in the worst circumstances, our children can fly.
Graham, after the break, I want us to talk about how to explore the power, the might of the unions, and also what can be done in those rural areas when we return. Net hierna bly ingeskakel. Welkom terug. Ons het die gesprek voort oor probleme in die onderwyssektor en moontlike oplossings. Graham, just before the break you mentioned and spoke about the unions that have allowed bad practices. I want you to elaborate on that, because we often find lately that if teachers are dissatisfied with what's happening at school, they take to the streets. In last week, there was a report that indicated that on one day with the return to school, there were about 10,000 teachers absent from our schools. We can't let this continue.
No, we can't let it continue. And I mean, you know, the teacher unions are giants in South Africa. We've got teacher unionism on a scale that is not seen anywhere else in the world. But teacher strikes happen all over the world, so we mustn't be opposed to unions or to the fact that unions have a lot of grievances, especially if we're looking at teacher conditions, at staff rooms, at toilets, at the conditions under which teachers are expected to teach. But I think this is not England, where the teachers are about to go on strike because they're getting cutbacks. They're about to oppose the government. This is not England. We have a government that is allegedly sympathetic and wants to do the same thing. So I think the unions need to look at ways of coming on board. And that, for me, is the question, is how do we get the unions on board, rather than how do we confront the unions and simply go head-to-head with the unions, which I think will result in a lot of destabilization. And I don't think it reflects where the teachers are, but teachers are responsible for who they elect.
Are we doing enough to sufficiently address the issues of bad management at schools? If we look at teacher training, the qualified and unqualified teachers, or underqualified even, about 70,000 teachers that need to be trained to even slightly address the need in our schools.
Look, mostly teachers are getting the qualification, so it's not a qualification issue, it's a teaching issue. And I think the problem is that often the department is not able to provide support. So it falls back on things like performance agreements, which sounds nice, but it doesn't necessarily enhance the accountability that we want to see in the system. We do want increased accountability, but it needs to come from increased support and from giving the help that principals will ultimately need. Many of the principals are doing the job well, and let's let them get on with it and find those teachers who need help and give them assistance, whether from government or from NGOs or from corporates, or, as we saw in the clip, from corporates getting together with government and designing great programs.
For teachers or school principals watching now and who feel slightly overwhelmed, there's a toolkit that you often refer to for best practice in school governance. Can you briefly touch on that?
Well, there's a departmental pamphlet on school governing bodies, but more than that, I think there are organizations like the grouping in KwaZulu-Natal. I know in Wits in Gauteng, there's a principal training course. The University of Johannesburg has been doing networks with principals. So I think there's and looking at leadership. So there's a range of alternatives. And I think the best thing is for teachers to make contact with the universities where the training happens and move from there, both in pre-teaching, before they become teachers, and also in service teaching. We need assistance.
I saw your comments earlier in the week on the SABC about why we are so angry, that documentary. And one of the things that you pointed out, which I found quite interesting and poignant, was that we are reproducing inequalities in South Africa, particularly in our education system. How do we stop it from henceforth?
Well, I fight with the children because the younger generation don't like to hear anything about race. But the reality is that if you're a white kid, you'll probably get through matric and 60% of you will go on to university. Whereas if you're a black kid, half of you won't even make it to matric. Maybe 12 to 15% will go on to university. So how do we stop that? We make sure the township and the rural schools produce the outcomes that we expect, and that poor kids have got as much chance as kids in the better off suburbs.
Do you foresee
Easy
that...
to say, but a lot of work to do.
Yeah, it sounds very disheartening, I have to tell you, Graham, but I'm wondering, is it then likely that more of us, and those who can afford it, and even those who's trying to scrape money together, will find their way to private schools because they find that there's more hope, a better chance of actually making a living in South Africa?
Lynette, things are getting better, but it's far too slow, I agree with you. And other countries are not waiting for us. Private schools, we've got a lot to learn from independent schools. I've been to schools like Redham and Abbott's and seen great things they're doing. But you know, even if they double from 5% of the schools to 10%, even to 15 or 20% of the schools, it still means the majority of kids are in the poor, rural and township schools. So it's really there we have to look for solutions. As I said, it's there where our future will be written. And it's there where kids are, where poor kids are, and where they need to learn to shoot for the stars and grab the opportunities that come their way.
Are you convinced that we have the political will to make this happen?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Are you convinced that we have the political will to make this happen?
Well, I think political will as South Africans means we've got to keep a lot of pressure on our political leadership. And let's not wait for Angie Mashega or any of the MECs in the province to do their job. So yes, if you look at the amount of people, whether it's University of Johannesburg or Symphonia or Bridge or Wits University or the Model C schools, the ex-Model Cs, yes, South Africans do have the political will. Sometimes they don't have the political leadership they deserve.
Yeah. Graham, unfortunately, that's where we'll have to leave it for this evening. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Lynn.
Dit was dan vanaand se fokus. Kykers se kommentaar en voorstelle is altyd welkom. Skryf net die woord fokus gevolg deur 'n kort boodskap en SMS dit na 34444. 'n SMS kos R2 en u kan gerus ook 'n lid word van ons fokusgroep op Facebook. Nou Fokus regisseur Karen Dolwiel besoek binnekort die Khoi en die San gemeenskappe om te hoor wat hulle as inheemse minderheidsgroepe van die regering verlang. Mense wat hul stemme wil laat hoor kan ons kontak telefonies, per e-pos of gemaak het op ons Facebookblad. Laat die kommentaar daar. Van my Lenet Francis en die res van die Fokusspan, totsiens tot volgende Sondag aand.